Hello everyone, in patch Luna 7 we will finally be getting our first playable Hex and Circle mage, Nicole. She has a lot of expectations on her shoulders regarding her power level as a character, such as her being the next Bennett replacement or the massive buff for the Hexerai team archetype, especially for Varka. There has been a ton of discussion in the community already about Nicole's strength and whether she fulfills her role as a strong support or if she's an underwhelming character that should be buffed. And in my opinion, based on her initial beta kit, both are somewhat simultaneously true. So let's discuss Nicole's beta kit and analyze her current strengths and weaknesses. But as always, remember that this is very early information for beta, so very subject to change before official release. Nicole is a 5-star Pyro Catalyst character who ascends of attack percent. As a Hex and Circle mage, she is of course a Hexerai character, though you still have to complete her homework quest, meaning she will enable and gain important bonuses when there are at least a total of 2 Hexerai characters on the team. Most of Nicole's supportive capabilities are related to her elemental skill. When used, it does an instance of pyro damage, generates 5 pyro particles, creates a strong pyro shield scaling with Nicole's attack, and most importantly, grants the team Grace of Kenosis for 20 seconds. This is simply an attack buff for the entire party, scaling off of Nicole's attack. At talent level 9, the team can get a maximum of 570 attack, but at talent level 10, the max attack buff is 600 attack. To max the buff, Nicole needs at least 4000 attack. This skill will snapshot any attack percent buffs on Nicole, but flat attack buffs like from Bennett and Eon-san won't count. As a result, it will generally be difficult for Nicole to reach 4000 attack for a max attack buff without a 5-star weapon, like her signature. Nicole's attack buff can be upgraded for specific characters with Nicole's A1 and A4 passives. When a non-Hexerai character is on field for 3 seconds, their Grace of Kenosis buff will be upgraded to Guidance of Theosis, which grants an additional 300 attack. If the on-field character is a Hexerai character, there is no delay on the extra 300 attack and they will get it immediately. This 300 attack only works for on-field characters, so it will disappear when they swap out and go off-field. The one exception to this rule is Nicole herself, who will get the extra 300 attack buff when another party member deals elemental damage and will maintain it even while she's off field. Currently, this extra 300 attack for Nicole is not accounted for in scaling her attack buff from the base skill. Nicole's elemental burst does pyro damage on cast and allows your team to trigger up to 5 arcane projections. One arcane projection can be summoned every 3 seconds when the active character hits an enemy. When this happens, the projection will perform a coordinated attack, dealing elemental damage matching the element of the character who triggered the projection, though this doesn't apply any element and therefore won't trigger reactions. In addition, the damage of the projection's attack scales entirely off the stats of the character who triggered the projection, so it will use their attack, crit, and damage percent when calculating the damage rather than using Nicole's stats. Lastly, if a Hexerai character was the one who triggered the arcane projection, with Nicole's Hexerai passive, the damage of that projection will be increased by 150% of Nicole's attack. So the arcane projections triggered by Hexerai characters will do more damage. That is Nicole's current base kit in a nutshell. To summarize all the buffs she gives to a team with her base kit, assuming her talents are level 10, her skill gives a strong pyro shield and up to 600 attack for the entire team, assuming Nicole builds enough attack, which can be difficult without a 5-star weapon like her signature. Hexerai on-fielders and Nicole will gain an additional 300 attack, while non-Hexerai on-fielders will have to wait for 3 seconds after swapping on field before they get the extra 300 attack. And then her burst grants a total of 5 coordinated attacks every rotation, each adding a 200 motion value attack, scaling with the stats of the character who triggered it. And if a Hexerai character triggers this, the damage of the coordinated attack will be increased by Nicole's attack via a quill-like buff. For her constellations, C1 enables the team to trigger more arcane projection coordinated attacks outside of her burst, each of them dealing 3 times the amount of a normal projection from her burst and having a 6-second cooldown. C2 increases her skill's attack buff, Grace of Kenosis, by 300 attack and does not count to her normal buff cap. In addition, whenever characters have their buff upgraded to Guidance of Theosis, aka when they get the 300 attack from being on field, they will also shred nearby enemies' elemental resistances corresponding to their element by 25%. Remember that Nicole gains and maintains her plus 300 attack from off field, so you basically get 25% pyro res shred from her, then 25% res shred for the element of the current on fielder. If there is res shred of the same element, they will not stack. C2 also enables Nicole's shield to be shared with other players in co-op. C3 grants 3 skill town levels. C4 enables 8 quill buffs scaling with Nicole's attack that increase the damage of characters that have gotten Guidance of Theosis, the plus 300 attack buff. C5 grants 3 burst town levels, and finally with C6, once Nicole upgrades her attack buff from Grace of Kenosis to Guidance of Theosis, which happens via her A4 passive whenever a character does elemental damage, all characters will have their buff upgraded to Guidance of Theosis and will not revert back. In other words, the plus 300 attack buff previously just granted to Nicole and the on-fielder is now given to everyone, both on-fielders and off-fielders. This also means that non-Hexerai characters don't have to wait 3 seconds to get the extra attack buff. Lastly, all characters on the team with Nicole's full attack buff will ignore 40% of the enemy enemy's defense. Overall, Nicole's constellations currently look decent, and for those of you willing to vertically invest in her, getting her C2 for instance will make her closer to the fabled Bennett replacement in many teams where she would have just been a side grade at C0. However, at least from the few stuff I've seen, Nicole's constellations aren't that insane in terms of damage gain compared to other very strong 5-star support constellations like Linnea's or Llama's C2. In terms of her potential best build options, her signature is of course the best weapon, as it gives Nicole a ton of attack, 26% damage bonus for the active character, 13% to off-field Hexerite characters if there are at least 2 Hexerite characters in the party, and 14 flat energy for Nicole. For other weapon options, Nicole mainly wants attack to scale her buff, with energy recharge being a secondary priority. So 5-star catalysts like Skyward Atlas, Memory of Dust, and Shen Yun's signature are good options because they just give a ton of attack. For 4-star weapons, Oathsworn Eye is the best choice because it gives attack and additional ER after she uses her skill. If you weren't able to get this old free event weapon, Ballad of the Boundless Blue, another event weapon, and the Fontaine Craftable Flowing Purity are fine to use as well. Now currently, because the damage of Nicole's arcane projections from her burst isn't that strong, you can decide to just ignore her burst. In these scenarios, you don't need to worry about energy recharge, you just need to build attack, and TTDS can be best in slot if the rotation allows for it. Even though it has low base attack, which means less attack for Nicole, the attack buff from the weapon to a DPS is still very strong. For artifacts, Nicole's best set is the new Hexerite support set releasing on her patch, as when she uses it with 2 Hexerite characters on the team, the 4-piece gives 40% pyro damage to the entire team and 40% damage bonus for the element of the on-fielder, though same element type bonuses won't stack. This set is basically 4-piece scroll but for Hexerite support, so it is incredibly strong. For main stats, she simply wants full attack to scale her attack buff. Energy recharge hourglass can be used if you need it, and she just wants attack and ER in substats as well, though ER isn't needed if you plan to skip her burst. Finally, Nicole's potential best teams. Nicole is a generalist support who primarily gives attack and a strong shield for the team, as well as damage percent with the new artifact set as long as there are at least 2 Hexerite characters on the team. Assuming you meet this Hexerite character requirement, she can work well in various different teams, being a viable alternative to not just Bennett, but also other supports like Eon-san, Chevers and Overload teams, and even Durin. Because Nicole's attack buff is team-wide, she synergizes with sub-DPSs who can benefit from her buff from off-field. Durin is the main unit she synergized the most with, but other sub-DPSs like Emily, Fischl, and Albedo also benefit a lot from her, creating different team cores for many main DPSs. With Emily, Durin, and Nicole, you have a very strong burning core that can enable reverse melt for cryo DPSs like Ganyu, Wriothesley, and Lohan. And for Ganyu and Wriothesley specifically, this burning team looks to be one of their newest best teams. The same core can also work fine for pyro DPSs including Klee, Yoimiya, Linny, and Arlecchino, with Bennett being able to substitute for Emily. With Bennett specifically, Razor can do well with this team, with the ability to trigger self-overloads with Bennett's burst. Albedo, Durin, and Nicole can form another strong sub-DPS core that can also work well with many of the pyro DPSs with their off-field damage and buffs. Navia specifically looks to do very well with this team, as it looks to be one of her new best teams that performs slightly worse than Columbina plus Linnea, but scales better with Navia's damage. Shilonen also works instead of Albedo for Navia, but Albedo currently looks slightly better. By pairing Nicole and Durin with C6 Farozon, you'll have a new best in slot team for Animo DPSs like Venti and Wanderer. The Nicole and Fischl duo can work great for both pyro DPSs and electro DPSs like Chlorand, Raiden, and Razor, with the last support slot being open to either Durin or Chevers. Bennett or Janssen in the final slot can also kinda work, but it probably is worse than Durin and Chevers. For specifically electro DPSs, especially Veressa, you can remove Fischl from the team, keep both Nicole and Durin, and then use either Chevers and Eon-san as the final support. The trio of Durin, Nicole, and Eon-san also is very strong for Chaska, as this overload-centric comp looks to be one of her new top-performing teams. Kanich is looking to get a significant damage upscale with Nicole plus Durin, introducing the Hexerite support set in his teams, and they work best with either C6 Eon-san or Emily as the final support. Albedo, Bennett, and TTDS Llama can also work. Nicole and Dark Mode Durin can also enable driver teams like Forward Vaporize with on-field Mona, making this team deal more damage than before. Similarly, a cryo driver like Lohan can drive forward melts for Dark Mode Durin with Sitlali, Shilonen, or Albedo as the final support. And finally, Nicole is looking to be a buff for Varka's pyro teams with either Venti or Prune as the Anima support and Durin. Nicole can also replace Durin instead if you don't have him, keeping Nicole plus Bennett as the pyro duo. That's everything on Nicole as of now. Nicole's initial beta kit puts her at a very interesting spot meta-wise. As long as she's paired with another Hexerite character to activate the new Hexerite support set, Nicole can be a very versatile support for a ton of older DPSs, regardless of whether they are Hexerite characters or not. Cryo melt carriers like Ganyu and Wriothesley are getting buffed with Nicole. Pyro DPSs like Klee, Yoimiya, Linny, and Arlecchino all work well with her. Electro DPSs like Chlorand, Raiden, Razor, and Veressa can benefit from Nicole. Venti, Wanderer, Navia, Kanich, Chaska, the list can go on. Nicole Nicole definitely benefits some characters more than others. For example, Varessa's highest damaging team doesn't look to include Nicole, Cloran is looking to get a slight buff, and Kanich is looking to get a more significant buff. These results do differ and depend on vertical investment and the assumptions made by a particular theory crafter. But regardless, Nicole does serve as a viable replacement for not only Bennett in teams, but also Iansan, Chevreuse, and even Durin. On top of that, her attack buff being team-wide means that off-field sub-DPSs like Durin, Emily, Fischl, and Albedo gain much more value in teams, pairing well with Nicole to form solid team cores. But aside from damage, Nicole uniquely removes any circle impact buff annoyances, currently isn't very burst reliant, and provides a very strong shield, which is amazing for units like Klee, Linny, and Kanich. So even if she is a slight damage downgrade for a team, she brings a ton of quality of life, which can be very valuable. She even manages to not be an upgrade for Malwika without her Constellations, and aside from very specific and optimized Malwika setups, because of her 3-second delay on her attack buff, which is honestly for the best. The big question is whether or not you value this versatility, because if you just focus on the few top meta teams, Nicole doesn't seem to look as valuable. But while Nicole is a versatile support, the trade-off is that numerically, her buffing capabilities can be somewhat limited. She works in a lot of teams, but many of them aren't getting insane damage buffs with her introduction. A lot of her value comes from her quality of life and flexibility, not necessarily her strict power. For example, in Varka teams, Nicole is definitely a buff for him, but she isn't designed to be his specific support like Lalma is for Nefer, for instance. As a result, the damage differences between Nicole plus Durin, Nicole plus Bennett, and Durin plus Bennett aren't that massive with Venti as the animal support, though with Prune, Nicole plus Durin specifically gains more value. Then, if we consider vertical investment, Varka himself deals more damage, so a singular stronger buffer for him, such as Bennett giving more attack to a single character than Nicole, gains more value. Part of Nicole's buff value is introducing the new Hexarai set for a team, but other Hexarai characters like Durin can use it too. Nicole's attack buff mainly shines with sub DPSs, but for hyper carries, it is generally lower than Bennett's. The extra attacks from her burst projections are designed to make up the difference, but they are currently pretty underwhelming damage-wise to the point where it can be worth to skip it to shorten the rotation, not worry about building ER, and just focus on maxing her attack buff. And even though Hexarai characters are supposed to benefit more from these projections with Nicole's Hexarai passive, this damage increase is also kinda whatever. Her burst and Hexarai passive are probably the biggest weaknesses in her current kit, and because of this, I do hope they specifically get buffed. I think that Nicole currently as a general support is in a pretty good state, giving a nice buff to older DPSs, but Hexarai on-fielders like Varka do have room to get a bigger upgrade than what they're getting currently. But we shall see if anything changes in the beta in the upcoming weeks. I hope this initial overview and analysis on Nicole's beta kit was helpful to you all. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, like the video, or sub to the channel if you enjoyed, and with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day.